Hello again, everyone. Andrew here. Welcome back to part 4 of the mystery of the bevel blocks. If you have not already, please check out the earlier episodes, as I will be building upon concepts brought up in those videos. Before we begin, I want to say thank you to all of you who have subscribed and left feedback and criticisms. That is what we are about around here. Special thanks to those who have subscribed to the album. I see it went up by 1. Also, I really appreciate the suggestions on improving the channel. I'm new at this, and to be honest, I'm really confused by a lot of the things that I'm looking at and bringing up. So if it shows in my videos, just understand that I'm pretty puzzled by what I'm looking at about half the time, and the other half the time I'm about to say something I know is kooky. So bear with me, guys. We're in uncharted waters here. Now let's continue. So I got a really good comment from a commenter named Ziggy Dan. Ziggy Dan and I seem to bump into each other all over the internet. He always has really good, insightful comments. So I'm going to take his idea a little seriously here, and we'll investigate it. I think I have a different opinion, but we're gonna look into his idea as well, because I think it's a really good idea. So he proposes that this piece may have once been a keystone for an arch. And if it was, and maybe recarved or repurposed, that is why it's an odd placement, and it would prove that this is a rebuilt structure. Now, I want to look closely at it. I want you guys to see that it is indeed a bevel block itself. It is beveled all the way around, and the mating pieces are also beveled all the way around. So, to me, this looks like it was always straight, and that there wasn't ever a curve to it, and this was deliberate on the bottom. And to back up my claim, I mentioned this spot at Baalbek that has the arched top over the lintel, a similar configuration. And then I also pointed out that this spot here might have had mitered corners on these blocks deliberately to create this little space. Now, after Dan proposed his viewpoint, I had to start scrolling back through some of my other pictures, and I found some things that I think you guys might be interested to see. So, now we're back at Saladin Castle on the inside, and again, perhaps, I know there's a gap, but perhaps this was mitered on purpose to create a space above, and over here, there appeared to have been a mirror image, except we have a damaged block. So, but you can clearly see a mitered edge that does not follow the horizontal lintel. Now, again, this site, the Dragon House of Ochi, I thought this was kind of interesting that there's a void, a space above the lintel. I'm not sure if it goes all the way through to the outside, but I just thought that was a really interesting feature that I hadn't really paid any attention to in the last few times I've looked at this picture. And then finally, here at the south wall in Jerusalem, like I mentioned at the end of the last video, we have these strange semicircular pieces on top. And you can see that the bevel on this upper piece follows the contour. So I'm not so sure if that keystone piece at Nimrod's castle was a arched keystone piece. I think that it was deliberately put there, and I think that it might be a cultural legacy, a hallmark of these ancient builders. Now, in defense of Ziggy Dan's proposal, at other places of Nimrod's fortress we have stuff like this. So, what does anyone make of this? I'm assuming this is person-sized, but these are among the biggest bevel blocks that I've ever seen. Now, we have upper elements here that seem to do all kinds of things they shouldn't, and we have multiple rows of what look like stacked rubble. But I'm still not sure about some of this. And this upper piece with the mitered edges and the inserted piece, find that very interesting. So he may be right, I may be right, maybe a combination of the two. It's very strange, isn't it? So we have to keep an open mind looking into this stuff. Maybe not jump to any conclusions prematurely. We may have a lot more we need to look at before we can make any more deductions. Even me. Also, I wanted to add that Shermanator Osborne, he had a really good insight as well. He proposed that maybe they held awnings, like, I'm thinking maybe even like stone awnings, like lips of stone that extended. That's an interesting idea. And we see in other instances, like in the south wall of Jerusalem, that there are filler pieces in some of these cases. So, very interesting hypothesis there. I like that. Again, I haven't really been searching for these hallmarks. I've kind of just been focusing on the bevel blocks. These have just kind of appeared as we've gone along. So it's as new to me as it is to you guys. So if you guys want to do some independent research of your own and get back to me, I'd love to hear your all's ideas. So let's move on. Okay guys, before we move on, I just wanted to show you the other portion, another angle of the south wall in Jerusalem. Pretty much the same level of detail in the other picture. You can't really see anything else that I can tell, but you can clearly see bevels, and these are pretty big blocks, heavily weathered, or maybe even some destruction damage, but definitely there should have been more to the top of this structure. It's not there. There's a big dent in the floor over here. Perhaps more of it's behind this in the background, or carted off to become foundations of another site. But I find this site really impressive, especially these little rounded pieces on top. I find those really interesting, and I really think it does look like at least a similar execution as the Osirion in Abydos, Egypt. So I have seen some interesting things at the Osirion. I've seen small filler stones, nub blocks, square holes. If there are bevel blocks there, they're really finely dressed because they're not obviously initially apparent. So I have not included the Osirion yet, but I have a very, very high there is a very high likelihood that these are the same builders. So moving on, I found this place really impressive. Acre walls at Israel. Clearly, the left portion is all bevel block top to bottom. It looks tight-fitting. It looks original. Some of these bevels have really wide profiles, and sometimes maybe this is even this is a non-beveled block, or just a very wide profile of the bevel. Very interesting. Some of these bevels, like, they almost become nubs. Maybe that's just due to erosion, but you look lower and you see smaller ones. Is that 2 on 1? Or is that 2? That's hard to tell. Same down here. Is this 2 on 1? Or is this 2 separate blocks? It's very interesting. Maybe some square holes over here. This part appears to be original as well. This little spillway or opening that they've obviously gated off. And I'm not so sure about the right-hand portion. It very well could be, here's the size of a person for scale, and a person fishing at the top for scale. I'm not so sure. This has different pointed arches. It's pretty plain in its execution. It didn't seem to hold up as well, but there is a possibility that this might have been an inner sheathing and this an outer cladding. So we might have to think about that possibility as well, since we do see finely dressed stones that I'm going to have to say that they're the same builders as the bevel blocks. If we see those two in connection with each other, we cannot rule out the possibility that other finely dressed, dry laid stones are the same culture. And if so, if this was an outer cladding and an inner skin, then that's an interesting execution, and maybe a clever execution, to have a nicer structure on the inside, but have a rugged, robust structure on the outside, right? So I don't really know much about architecture again, but I'm just trying to see it from a practical, pragmatic point of view, because I think that's the most important thing to these builders. There doesn't seem to be so much ornamentation or any kind of execution of their culture in stone at this point. Maybe we will see some statues in the future that we may have to call into question. Say if they have nubs or square holes on them. I haven't even bothered to start looking at statues yet. If someone else wants to do that, feel free. But we will move on, because I think this was the only picture I could find of this quality. I think there's more, but this one was pretty impressive. And next we are at Damascus, Syria. Now, this site, let's see what I read. Left wall contains some bevel blocks. Follow the drain pipe up to the top of the structure and you can see more. Also some above the right arch. Okay? Now, yep, bevel block. These are bevel blocks. This, definitely. Yes. Maybe finely dressed ones here and here. And over the right arch, yes, definitely. That's my dog snoring, by the way. Yes, and she agrees. Those are definitely bevel blocks. So, let's look at the rest of the structure a little closer here. Obviously, this arch is questionable. This lower portion, obviously either a repair effort or a reconfiguring happened in the past, maybe several times on this part. These might be original, the actual pointed nature of these arches. They continue up at the top, and again, you see they're a chunky style. They're a nice big hefty stone arch, and we even see them in connection with the square lintel pieces. So I'm not so sure. The shapes might vary, but the execution seems to always be the same. A big hefty block all the way around. Nothing too spindly or rough or irregular. These kind of all tend to be a pretty strong, sturdy structure. Like these were intended to hold weight. And we will see some incredible examples of that later. Here's some bevel blocks over here, a square hole. This is more than likely reconfigured like Legos. See, here's a bevel block. Here's some more. If this structure is original, it is heavily destroyed and reconfigured. This part over here with all this mortar, definitely a reconfiguring or a repair effort. And down here, this might be original. But this over here, maybe that's a reconfiguring with bevel blocks, again like Legos. So these sites can get really complicated and really convoluted, and this was one of the first instances of that, because I stared at this for a while and I said, I know they're there, but I just couldn't see them right away. But you stare at it for a while and they start popping out more and more places. More and more places. So let's continue. Okay. This one should be pretty controversial. This is a classic medieval looking castle. Yes? It's in France. This is one of the first entries. Yeah, this is the first entry I found in France. So this one was kind of a shock to me. It was the farthest away from the others. And the execution here is obviously a classical medieval style. So with turrets, top, it's just, I always thought of this from my childhood as a medieval style castle, but I was immediately confronted by the right hand portion, And I said, nope, those are definitely bevel blocks. And they even have some anomalies, square holes. This piece, very strange. The arrow slit, again, we see arrow slits other places. This one, like I mentioned before, it is a square holed block. It's just the bottom is used for the bottom of the arrow slit. At the top, it's not like that. It's weird that this square hole is here instead. It's almost like they missed, right? Like this should have been over there. That's interesting. Is this two nubs on one block? If so, that's interesting. I find the fact that some nubs are very long and oval and take up the whole block, and other ones very small and only takes up some of the block. That's an interesting, unique thing that I haven't seen much of lately, or yet. So, you look around this wall, and you start to see other nubs and other anomalies, but then you're immediately confronted by all the rubble construction. So, what is going on here? Why the switch? So, we have to step back again and start looking at other features of this. So, the entire foundation for this rubble part is mortared blocks. Those appear to have settled. And they may have incorporated bevel blocks into this. These are kind of interesting to me, and I might be seeing more over here. But for the most part, these do not appear to be bevel blocks. These are just finely dressed stones, or at least evenly dressed stones that are mortared together. And then some serious rubble infill mixed with some larger blocks, maybe one with a square hole. So this, I would say, is a conglomerate structure. Here we have an entire bevel block upper turret. And here you can see square holes, you can see arrow slits, and you can see bevels that are almost nubs, right? They're very rounded and very organic looking and less square and geometric. They can range from one to the other, it seems like. Formal, extremely formal, perfect, or as lumpy and irregular, but I don't think it really affects the structure's integrity, the strength. I do find it interesting that there are bricks at the bottom here. This might have been an attempt to shore up the structure. There may be heavily eroded portions of bevel block underneath these. So I find this execution similar to Saladin Castle, these rounded turrets, and the bases that tend to square out. I don't know if they're underneath there is more bevel block or not. I don't know if this protruding structure is original or not. But this is a very peculiar example, and I'm still not sure what to think about it. Let's see if I can get these arches. What are these? Are these reclaimed pieces? And then you see random arched pieces here. What's that about? And perhaps one here. So this site, this castle, has probably been attacked a few times, right? And it has probably had to be repaired a few times. It may have even been invaded and taken over by different people at one or several points. More square holes up here. These might be for attaching cornices or maybe even ramparts and scaffolding, right? And these upper elements do remind me again of Baalbek. Very slender, maybe 1 block wide in some instances. Stair step. A lot to this picture. And I believe I have one more angle of this site. So I was wrong. That place is Carcassonne. I know I pronounced that wrong, but it's the best French I can muster. And this is a completely separate site. Aigues Mortes. So what did I say about this one? Mortar can be seen between the blocks, implying a rebuilt structure. And then from the Wikipedia page, the foundation of the city is said to have been by Gaius Marius around 102 BC, but there is no documentary evidence to support this. Interesting. So let's take a look. Yep, for sure. Those are definitely bevel blocks. And yes, mortar, perhaps original elements. This is interesting. Look at this arrow slit and how this block was carved to make it, and these nubs at the top that frame it. That's a very interesting example. I have not seen that before. Here you have a flat top, split blocks, and then the bottom is another one of those pieces. Very interesting. So similar elements at the top and the bottom, similar elements at the left that also incorporate bevel blocks. We may be looking at an original structure. There may be portions, maybe these smooth portions are all the damage, the battle damage that have been stuccoed over. Very interesting, right? Makes you wonder if this is a completely original structure. Square holes again, maybe just for looking through, maybe for attaching a scaffold on the other side. Ramparts, pediments, I'm not sure all the official terms, but again you see the nub blocks, frame, the arrow slits, and the special blocks for, I guess, water drainage, right? So water won't drain into the building. That makes sense. Up here as well. So even this upper element, the blocks seem to do some strange things up at the top, getting smaller in areas. And this piece again, like in Jerusalem and at the castle of Schöbeck, we know this as a traditional defensive construction for dropping hot acids and water and fire and projectiles down on invading armies. But it's funny that we see it at these other locations as well. I'm not sure about these things, right? Very interesting. These this is a water spout. Now I've seen these at Baalbek. This one may be a gargoyle even, I'm not sure. This one may have had one and it's just broken off. I wish I could see more of that. The one at Baalbek is not figurative. It is just a squared off protruding block. And the fact that they have protruding blocks means that the proposed awning idea, the stone awning, that could have relevance if they use some of these square holes as sockets for other blocks that are just now missing. I believe Shermanator also mentioned that some of the square holes can be seen in South America at was it Tiahuanacu, where the little stone carved heads are attached into the walls. So that's something to think about. And then of course, then from there you can think about the legacy of attaching gargoyles to and water spouts to buildings and all the significance that they have. So this is a very interesting example, kind of controversial because of its distance and its Orthodox history. Even these arches might be original. These appear to be bevel block. A nice, strong style. These appear to be mostly uniform, but I definitely see mortar, so perhaps during invasions these pieces fell out because of the building's integrity. It probably stayed together pretty well, and then these pieces were just reattached, like missing teeth. That's just my hypothesis. This one may also, in places, other places maybe not. I don't know. Maybe. It's really hard to tell. It's as far as I can zoom, guys. Sorry. So, a lot to think about with these sites. Maybe even there's an inner version of the upper feature for dropping more horrible things down on enemies. So, something to think about. These are very sophisticated but also defensive features. So, let's continue. Okay guys, let's go for another 5 or 10 minutes just to try to keep the size of the video manageable. Well, we are in Egypt now. How did we get to Egypt? So this was the point in the research after I think I had seen the first French castle coincidentally, and then I searched and found the second French castle, and it was at that point I said, okay, if they're all the way in France, they've got to be in Egypt. For some reason I knew that there had to be some connection. And one of the first pictures I found that had a definite connection was the Kalabsha Temple. Now, you can read what I said. I think pretty generic. Okay. Let's take a look closer here. I've got something to point out. So look at the right-hand portion. Clearly bevel block, clearly square holes, and some instances of tiny filler stones. You see that in other places. Now, what I found most peculiar is this line that goes down. Now, does that look familiar to anyone? Has anyone seen that anywhere else in Egypt? I have. At the Menkaure Pyramid, the base casing stones at the entrance go from extremely puffy and nubby blocks, and they immediately shift to smooth and finely dressed. And this was another eureka moment for me, because this was what connected the finely dressed but still, dry laid and sometimes formal, sometimes informal stones with the bevel blocks. So in some instances in Egypt, I knew I was looking at a bevel block structure or someone from the same culture's structure, but I couldn't prove it because I couldn't see any of the bevels. I could see square holes, I could see other anomalies, but I just couldn't find any of the bevels, and it was driving me crazy because I knew that they had to be somewhere, but I couldn't prove it. But now we have to look a little bit deeper into this rabbit hole, because this changes everything right here. And this was my first indication. Now, what does this imply about the rest of the structure, right? So the lower elements, these are the ones that are in better condition. These are bevel blocks. The shift happens right along here, and from here over everything is smooth. It's very nicely done, and I'm not sure if it goes back to bevel block over there. It might. I think it continues to finely dressed all the way around. Now, the columns, heavily repaired, correct? Small filler stone there. That's interesting. I don't believe I see any square holes. Maybe there. Definitely there. Maybe there. Definitely there. So I believe, yep, more square holes. Square holes all throughout the back there. I believe that these columns are original. Now, when it comes to the capitals, we're looking at, what, 3 different styles of capital? Maybe 4? You can see this style here with the thicker vertical elements, thinner vertical elements, thinner vertical elements. This one's almost Corinthian, and so is this one. This one's interesting with the vertical leaves. I'm not sure what this one once had for its elements below its leaves, but it could be a different style. It looks thinner than this one. This one has more going on around the top. So this was another huge eureka moment for me, guys, because this row of different columns told me that they could do anything. That if they wanted a capital to be a certain way, they could do it on the fly like this, each one different. So this calls into question, to me, a lot of the traditional Egyptian, Greek, and Roman columns and to whom they originally belong. So this can get really controversial from this point. So I'm going to try to be as respectful as I can and just point out the facts. I won't go too deep into the history unless I've included it in the comment. You're more than welcome to go look it up at Wikipedia. But now things start getting really weird. And I think I'll close it up here because we may have to go into some other topics in the other sites. I want to mention some of these style blocks that have this lip of material. And in this instance, it's very formal, but in other times it looks almost accidental. So let's stop it here. There's a lot of things to think about. We've been a lot of places, but the hallmarks have always been there. And these square holes have been following us the whole way. So we stick to those two, and I think we're going to see some really interesting things coming up, guys. So thanks for hanging out with me this morning, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.